My name is Joanna Drew, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. And my objective is to create a space in which you feel comfortable asking questions, sharing out your experiences, apprehensions. I know AI can be a challenging topic. There's a lot of excitement about the opportunity, but also fear and trepidation around many of the intersecting impacts. So I'd love for this to be interactive as well. And if you have, again, questions, comments, concerns, feel free to raise your hand and let's go ahead and get started. So again, I'm Joanna Drew, and I founded my business, Hilo Consulting, in 2020. I started out providing grants management services for nonprofits and NGOs, internationally working organizations. I tend to skew on the small grassroots side of the house, and so proudly have secured over $5 million in grant funding for my clients since then. And in 2023, when ChatGPT really blew up on the scene, I dove in headfirst. I decided to lean into curiosity over fear and just learn everything I could about the technology. Since then, I have been on a fundraising.ai podcast about grant writing in AI. I have co-authored an article in the Center for Effective Philanthropy on philanthropy's role in responsible AI adoption. And I've been on a bit of a speaking tour. This is actually my third engagement this week. And I've been talking about AI on both the nonprofit and funder side of the house. So really getting perspectives on both sides. And shameless plug for my newsletter. It's called AI for Social Impact Newsletter. I'll have a QR code at the end if you want to sign up, but no pressure. And that was because I found that there's this void in information, education around AI that's specifically tailored to our sector. So the newsletter is bi-weekly, and it's really around educating, inspiring, and activating folks around AI, which means education is kind of current events or terminology. Inspiration is bringing in case studies about AI. And activation is how can we get started with this today? And the reason I have the pictures of my cute niece and nephew up here is not only because I'm a proud auntie, which I am, but I think I want to come back to this point that when we're using this technology, we have to keep making what is uniquely human at the center. So we have to keep humans at the center of all we do when we use AI. All right, so on the agenda today, I like to think about this as sort of a funnel. So first, we will look more broadly at the AI landscape, and then we'll narrow in on some AI fundamentals and basics, then narrow in further on what AI adoption would look like on an organizational level, and then how individuals can use the tools effectively, and then take a look at some use cases, specifically in the nonprofit sector. So, brief history of AI. In 1950, Alan Turing coined the Turing test, which is essentially if a human cannot distinguish the machine from the human, the machine is considered to possess human-level intelligence. Then in 1997, IBM's Deep Blue beat the world chess champion, Garry Kasparov, in chess, which was the first time a machine beat a human in a tournament-style match. Fast forward to 2017, and Google published a paper called Attention is All You Need, and this was the birth of the transformer architecture. And essentially, the breakthrough of the transformer is that it allows AI to treat everything like text, images, sound, DNA sequences, MRI brain scans as a form of language. And so this really set the stage and shifted the AI landscape into the AI we know today. In 2022, OpenAI launched ChatGPT. Does anyone know how long it took for ChatGPT to reach 100 million users? And for comparison's sake, TikTok was 9 months, Instagram was 2.5 years. Does anyone want to guess?
2 days.
5 minutes. 2 days. Not that fast, but yeah. Anyone else? 60 days. So that's really setting the stage for this exponential trajectory of growth that we find ourselves in this AI landscape. And then today, AI is becoming embedded across a variety of industries, and the focus is on generative AI, and we'll talk about the terminology in a moment, the reasoning and logic capabilities of the tools, agents. Have you all heard of AI agents? Some of you? Automation, and then, of course, everything is founded on the building blocks of data. So I created this pyramid of the AI ecosystem for two reasons. The first is to help everyone understand sort of the different layers that comprise the AI ecosystem, but also to hone in on the point that the ecosystem is very concentrated by a few players, right? So at the infrastructure layer, we've got your data centers, compute, cloud, raw minerals and hardware for the hardware. And this is where you've got your main big tech players that you know and love or hate. Amazon, NVIDIA, Google, Microsoft, Meta. And so at this layer, it's very expensive to have all of these different components, right? And so the upfront investment of capital is in the billions, and that's why only these companies can afford to create this infrastructure, and then by way they now control it. Then if we go up to the model layer, this is where the intelligence lives. So this is where you've got your ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI tool, and that actually embeds on top of ChatGPT and Claude. So you can actually toggle between the two models if you are a Microsoft Copilot user. And then Gemini is Google's proprietary model. And there are some others like Perplexity. Has anyone heard of Perplexity? Mistral, which is a model out of France. DeepSeek is out of China. And so this is essentially that layer where you're either interacting with that directly or with an application. So if you're using a note taker or a grant writing tool, for example, that's a third-party vendor, they're likely overlaying on top of this model layer. There are some exceptions to this, like open weight models, but it's a little too technical. Maybe the vibe coder knows about that. And so we're not going to get into that, but essentially those are the main players. And then there's you, right? So you're interacting either directly with an application or with the model layer. Is that clear so far for everyone? Okay, great. All right, let's talk about some terminology. So sounds like a lot of you are using AI tools regularly, which is great. So hopefully all of these terms are familiar to you. So first we've got our large language models, the LLMs, and you could kind of think of this as the brain. This is what understands language, reads your documents, interprets information, and the main point I want to hone in on about LLMs is that they're different from traditional software, which is deterministic. So you give it one input and you'll get the same output every time. LLMs are probabilistic, and so they have learned by ingesting huge amounts of data, all the data on the internet, and then they predict the next word based on patterns they learned during their training. And so you'll give it an input, the same input, and you can get a different output every time. The prompt, this is your assignment. So this is what the instructions that you're giving the brain. So the clearer the assignment, the better the output. And so here is where, who's heard of the term prompt engineering? Yeah, essentially that's when you are giving the tool the information that it needs to do a job effectively. And we'll talk about prompting more in detail in a moment. And then generative AI, so this is the creator. So this is what produces the deliverable, right? The output. It creates or generates content. This is where you get your grant narrative, a board memo, social media posts. Then we've got agentic AI. So this is like your colleague. This is AI that you give a goal, and then it decides itself the steps to take to be able to achieve that goal. So they call it autonomous, but it's, I would say, semi-autonomous. But again, it's, you just tell it what you want it to do, and it will use reasoning and logic to decide the steps it needs to take to achieve that goal. And so the reasoning, this is like your analyst, and this is where these frontier models like Claude and ChatGPT are so powerful, and it's really, they've advanced in reasoning and logic over the last couple of years, where it's this capability for them to think through multi-step problems and do very much like humans do, apply logic and reasoning to solve a problem. Predictive analytics, so this is like a forecaster. So it's looking at past data to predict future outcomes. And you're likely interacting with predictive analytics in a number of websites you use all the time, like Netflix. So after you finished a series and it recommends other series for you, this is predictive analytics. It's using your past viewing history to predict what you might want to watch next. Then vibe coding, so happy to have a fellow vibe coder in the crowd. This is the idea that any non-coders, like non-software engineers like me, can prompt one of the AI tools to generate code, and then an agent can then deploy that code. So I can now build websites and apps myself using AI tools. And then AGI, this is artificial generalized intelligence. Has anyone heard of this term? Yeah. Do you want to give it a try of what this means? Okay. So AGI is the hypothesis that AI will one day possess human-level intelligence across any task. And at this point, there are varying timelines on if and when this is possible. But these reasoning capabilities of the tools now have convinced some very smart tech people that this could be an eventuality. And then one step further, anyone heard of superintelligence? So this is the idea that one day AI will surpass all of human-level intelligence. All right, so let's talk about some of the risks and limitations of the technology. So the gentleman in the back was talking about the way that he hedges against the hallucinations, which is essentially made up information. So AI, because these generative tools, their task is to generate, they're going to generate output no matter what. And they will generate very confident, plausible sounding responses that are just totally made up. So it's really important to verify statistics and any claims before using the output. And you can also include this in your prompt when you're interacting with the tool. So for example, you could add something like, only cite research studies if I've provided them to you in this conversation, or if you don't have a verified source, say so instead of generating one, or flag any factual claim that needs verification before I send this. Then data privacy, which I heard I saw it was a concern in the poll. So if you're using a free AI tool, you could consider that you're paying with your data. So it's really important to always opt out of model training if you are paying for a tool, and then regardless if you're paying or not, just omit any sensitive or private information that you wouldn't want, one of these tech companies to know about. And how many of you are Microsoft in your organizations? Okay, majority of you. So the other benefit for keeping your AI usage in-house, so for Microsoft Copilot, for example, is they will protect your AI inputs with the same enterprise security protections that you have with your organizations where your data is living anyway. So it's just something to think about as you move along your AI adoption journeys. Bias, so AI systems reflect the biases embedded in their training data. So if you consider that AI was trained on all the data in the internet, and then consider whose perspectives are represented and whose perspectives are missing, right? You've only got knowledge from a very small slice of humanity. And these perspectives are the only perspectives that have been digitized, right, and made accessible on the internet. And so bias can come through with the training data, right, reflective of all this information on the internet. And it can be perpetuated at scale. If you remember the pyramid, you've got the model layer and the application layer. And so if you're using this for, say, hiring, right, and you're embedding it on top of this model with the training data that has biases in it, you're at risk of perpetuating bias at scale. So it's definitely a consideration, and there are ways to hedge against it. There are tools. Latimer AI is an LLM that has been trained on diverse voices. So that's a way that you can, play around with different tools and kind of mitigate that bias. But just being aware of it and being sensitive when you're using AI to talk about communities or identities, keeping that in mind. Then shadow AI, has anyone heard of this term? So this is just the idea that folks are using AI at work without their organization's consent. And so this is where governance will create, a sanctioned, safe pathway for usage. And then over-reliance, this is real. When we become really dependent on these technologies for generating grant proposals, for example, like I use it for, we can create an over-reliance and diminish our own critical thinking skills, our own discernment. So just, being mindful and intentional about your AI usage is really important. What you're outsourcing to AI versus what you're keeping, human, as I mentioned earlier. And then eco-prompting. I know, especially in this sector, the environmental concerns are real for everyone, and take it with a grain of salt. I saw this term and I thought it was an interesting concept to kind of take that agency a little bit around the environmental concerns of just being really intentional about how you're prompting, right? And we'll talk about prompting structures in a moment, but if you think about AI using water and energy for every query, really setting the stage for getting a good output out front, minimizes the back and forth you'll have to do with the tools, and it can perhaps, decrease that environmental footprint. So you've got environmental concerns on a number of different levels with AI, right? I'm sure here in Wisconsin, there's a lot about data centers, and these are huge concerns of communities on water consumption, energy consumption, to have these data centers using, right, the local water, because data centers require water to cool their systems. And of course, energy, right? Using energy on the grid and then increasing costs for folks as well as a concern. And then you've got environmental justice issues around where the data centers are being built. So you've got that part of the environment. And then that onus is really on the government, right? And big tech companies for the government to regulate the big tech companies and, to pass laws with the environment in mind. But then on the other side, the eco-prompting is kind of, as a consumer, as individuals, how we can take matters into our own hands in a way, have a little bit of agency around that, and being really intentional about how we're using it. So we'll talk about prompt engineering in a minute, and maybe it'll become clearer there. It's really about setting the context for the output that you want up front so that you are doing less iterations back and forth to get to your final output. All right, so then we've got our 3 modes of AI use, right? So the chatbot, I think, is probably where most of us are, except for our vibe coder. I'm going to keep calling you out, sir. So the chatbot is what responds to each request, right? This is where you are having that back and forth with the AI tool. The chatbot are your generative AI, your LLMs. And by the way, I didn't mention I am sending the slides out afterwards, so don't feel like you have to take feverish notes and pictures. So this is where you're driving at every turn. This requires you reviewing every output, and an example there. Then we've got our agents. And so this again is what will pursue. You give it a goal that you want it to achieve, and then it will decide on the steps to achieve it. So you are setting the destination, and the AI tool is navigating. The human oversight here are these checkpoint reviews to make sure that it's not going rogue and, deleting all the files on your computer, which have happened to people using some AI tools before. Then workflow automations. And so you don't have to integrate AI in a workflow automation. So for example, if you want to create an automation where you have a trigger every Sunday night at 7 p.m., you get a summary of your coming week's calendar events, your meetings. And so the trigger is the starting point, and then it'll summarize your events and send you an email, for example, right? That's the start and the finish point. With AI, for example, if you wanted to embed AI into this workflow, it might be trigger at 7 p.m. on a Sunday, then summarize all the events, but then add action items for you to do, right? So then you're introducing that intelligence to it, the AI tool, to say, oh, you have this meeting with this very important funder, you need to create an agenda and pull your report for that, for example, right? So workflow automations can work with AI and without AI. And this is something that you set up, it'll run on its own, and then you'll review periodically. Did all that make sense so far? Okay. All right, so talking about AI adoption on an organizational level, how many of you have policies in place around AI in your organizations already? Okay, so quite few of you. How many of you are discussing it, but don't know where to start? Okay, great. And then how many of you have never thought to put an AI policy in place? Okay, some of you, yeah. So essentially, right, we've got the shadow AI use, and the way to kind of hedge against that is to create a policy, right? To put some governance around how AI can be used in your organization. So, and this is not an exhaustive list, but this is a good starting point of how you could think about what this might look like in your organization. So acceptable use, this would be what tools are approved, what tasks are appropriate, what is explicitly off limits. Data, which is, you're going to hear me talk about data a lot today. This is what information can go into AI tools, what cannot go into AI tools, and what protocols are in place on handling sensitive data. Decision making, so this is, do you have an internal AI champion, for example? Which staff members are owning AI decisions? Is it executive leadership? Is it the board? Or is it just a departmental head? And then what role does the board of directors play in this decision making? And then reviewing. As we know, AI is moving super fast. So implementing periodic reviews of your policy to make sure it still stands. So if you created a policy a year ago, you might not have anything in there about AI agents, right? Because now they're very top of mind for folks in AI. So the review is, how are you measuring success? What might trigger an out-of-cycle review? And how are staff able to surface concerns or feedback about AI? Then on the organization level, part of it is, right, learning about AI, how it works, when it can and cannot be used. But the other part of it is human behavior. So I would say this is maybe arguably the most challenging aspect of adopting AI, where we're learning a whole new way of working, and then maybe one day a whole new way of living alongside AI. And so this is a model by Lucid, so you can look this up independently. But essentially, this is kind of the continuum of how you would introduce a change in your organization. So building awareness, answering the question, why are we doing this? Announcing the change ahead of time, explaining your reasoning. Is it to address a pain point? Is it for return on investment around AI? And giving folks an opportunity to ask questions and make suggestions about the implementation. Then you've got your desire. Why should I care about this? gauging employees' reactions to the change, identifying AI champions, which is something I mentioned earlier. If folks are resistant or indifferent, being able to address their concerns at an early stage. The knowledge, of course, is the capacity building, the training. What do I need to learn to be able to use this effectively? The ability is addressing the question, can I actually do this? Scheduling practice runs, perhaps implementing 10 minutes for AI exploration during your staff meetings, setting reasonable goals and expectations from the start, and then reinforcing the learning with monitoring the change over time, how you're measuring success to see that you're getting your desired outcomes. All right, and then data. This is the least sexy topic of all, but it is the most important when we're talking about AI, both on the organizational level, so before you're even thinking about AI implementation, and then of course, as we've talked about a number of times, the considerations for what data you're putting into the systems. So there's this adage in data science, garbage in, garbage out. So before you're doing any workflow automations with AI, you want to make sure your data is in a good place, data hygiene. So unstructured data looks like qualitative data. Structured data is that quantitative data. Data readiness, again, this is, are you abbreviating Wisconsin? Are you spelling it out? And are you being consistent in all the address columns with Wisconsin in them? And then, again, pre-AI, what is your data policy? Right? So ensuring that all of your staff members are on the same page with data. And then hammering in on the point, what's permitted to put into AI, what is prohibited. And then if you are using a paid tool, you can opt out of model training. They will automatically opt you in. So you do have to go to the back end, your settings, and make sure that you're opting out if you don't want to contribute to training their model. Okay, this is a lot of text, so it's not a very beautiful slide. I'm not going to go into the details here, but it seems that most of you are Microsoft Copilot, so that might be a good way to start with your experimentation. If you are using sensitive documents, you're keeping things in-house. I led a workshop yesterday with some nonprofit professionals, and what we found, because we were using Copilot, was that there were different permissions based on their IT department amongst all of the organizations. So some were able to use data from their organization in Copilot and some were not. So just keeping that in mind, that it might look different on different levels of permissions with your organizations. And then if you are a Google Workspace user like I am for my business, Gemini could be, low-hanging fruit, a way to try it, keeping your data in-house. And then of course, ChatGPT and Claude. So they all have enterprise plans, they all have nonprofit discounts as well. And so the main point I want to bring up here is, if you don't even know where to start, you could just use a free tool and ask AI to help you decide, right? You're giving it the parameters. I'm trying to evaluate which tool might be best for me. These are the kinds of projects I work on. Can you please search for pricing, features, discounts, etc., and score the tools, right? So kind of engaging AI as well to help you evaluate what AI you might want to use. Kind of when in doubt, you could always default to Ask AI. Okay. All right, let's talk about individual adoption. I gotta see how we're doing on time here. Okay, so this is where we get into prompt engineering. There were only a few of you that have heard of this term, and don't be intimidated by it. It's essentially this. So if you kind of personify the prompt, it's what would you need to give to a colleague that you're delegating a task to? So what information would they need to know to be able to do the task effectively? So this is one framework. There are many frameworks. You definitely don't have to stick to this one, but they all, highlight the same things. So it's, what do you want the AI to do? What background does the AI need to understand about your situation? So this would be like your mission, your vision, who you serve, right? Resources, what materials, examples can you provide? So say you want AI to help you write some social media posts. You would want to perhaps give it your annual report or any quarterly reports, or if you have a doc already with a bunch of social media posts you've already written, you can upload that. And these are like reference materials that it can create new content out of your annual report, but then it also can match your tone, the way you communicate about the work that you're doing, etc. And then the reason I have this infinity graph here is because it's introducing the idea of evaluating and iterating is maybe a new concept to many of us, where you're probably not going to get the best output on the first try. And so that's why you have to bake in evaluation and iteration into the process. So did the output meet your needs? Did it not? And how are you going to refine the prompt to then get your best results? Something else that you could start to do as you begin to use AI is when you've got a great prompt that's getting you the best output in the least iterations, you could just start creating a prompt library of the effective prompts for certain tasks. So just an idea there. So here's just a quick example, right? A bad prompt would be make a content plan. It has no idea anything about your organization or what kind of content or for what. Right? Create a formatted content plan with specific sections, or you're a content strategist, right? You're defining the role. Create a content plan for my organization that does this kind of work for these platforms. Present the plan in a table format. So this is, are you going to want just one really long Word document? Probably not. You'll want a spreadsheet that has for Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, when you're posting on LinkedIn, Instagram, here are the posts that you can, I'll get to you in a second, the posts that you can share and then keep posts under 200 characters. And so the idea of a system prompt, right? So the prompting that we were talking about earlier is you interfacing back and forth, right? It's the context you provide to get your output. A system prompt is something that you set up once. So for example, an executive director's assistant or a communications assistant that then has the role of who the AI should be, the tone and style, so how does it sound, the guardrails, any rules that the AI should follow, and this could be like never use first and last names of, people in our programs, for example, when posting on social media, and then the process, the steps that the AI should follow. And so it's an ethereal concept at this point, but essentially what this does is you create it once for a communications assistant, for example, and then you upload it to the instructions in a project, a gem in Google, or an agent in Microsoft Copilot. And then you can interact with it without having to give it all this background and context every single time, because these serve as the instructions of how that AI will act. Does this make sense? I have a little demo on it that I'll share. If we don't get to it today, I'll share it afterwards of how to set that up. Okay, finally, use cases. So we were talking about earlier about if and when to use AI. And again, it is not a panacea. It is not a silver bullet. It is not going to solve all your problems. And so thinking about where to use AI, if and when it's viable for a specific problem you're trying to solve, you would want to approach it with this framework, right? What problem am I solving? What outcomes do I want to achieve? And how am I measuring success? So, for example, this has been one of the very early adopters of generative AI. They're kind of a leader in the field for how they're using this technology. So Crisis Text Line faced the challenge of identifying texters that were at imminent risk of suicide quickly enough to intervene because they had such an overwhelming message volume they couldn't identify them first. So that was their problem. The first come, first served triage of incoming crisis text, delayed support for highest risk texters. Defining success for them in this situation was the transition from a sequential message triage to AI enabled. And so what they did was they used transcripts, anonymized transcripts from many years, to train their AI tool to then be able to identify when someone was at imminent risk. And so their KPIs were they identified 86% of severe cases within their first conversation, and that enabled 94% of high-risk texters to be served in under 5 minutes. World Reader, this is another one on the program side. So they wanted to expand their digital library into diverse global markets. So they had a high cost and slow pace of translation for their 1,400 book library into local languages. Defining success for them was making high quality reading material available paired with personalized activities, and their KPIs were just translating all their books and creating these personalized activities that adapt to the child's reading level using AI. And then finally, we've got Steel Hearts, and this is a veteran-serving organization. And so this is more administrative. He was using Outlook. He had all of this information in his email and his inbox, and manually retrieving data for members' contact information, service histories, was taking him a very long time. So then he used Copilot to transition from manual, time-intensive search processes to near instantaneous data retrieval, enabling the ED to maintain high-level operations. And so I'll also want to lift up here, right? This is where you want to just verify that the AI has produced accurate output and is not hallucinating in certain cases. And so this resulted in, 25% improvement in overall operational efficiency for Copilot users. Okay. All right. So thank you so much. I hope I left you feeling excited to use AI tools. Yeah, you're welcome. Take care. And that's the QR code for my newsletter, but no pressure.